This is Seek Sustainable Japan. I'm JJWalsh, your host in Hiroshima. And today, once again, we have the pleasure of welcoming back Azby Brown, who has been in the series many times, has his own playlist. We have had so many wonderful insights from Azby over the last 2 years. Thank you so much for joining once again, Azby.
It's a pleasure to be here. How are you doing?
Really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank
Uh,
you.
One quick thing. I see a picture of trees
Yes.
dominating the screen right now. So I don't know
It,
if our
it's
faces
in
are
the
visible.
background. Yeah, it's in the background, so it should be in the background.
Great. Okay.
I see us.
Good.
Yeah,
So they
yeah.
can see us. Great.
Hopefully,
No, it's a
people can
pleasure to
see us.
be back, and really appreciate that you've had me on to talk about so many things. And of course, everything's ongoing, and we're in a hell of a time in many ways right now. So there's a lot for us to think and talk about.
Definitely. In fact, you have, through your work with Safecast, which we've also talked about in the series, focused on sharing data about radiation and different parts of Japan as well as the world. You've been doing some research on the situation in the Ukraine and Chernobyl. Do you want to talk about that first?
Yes, like a lot of people, I was alarmed, and our group Safecast members were very alarmed by what was happening in Ukraine, and hoping that Russia would not invade, but expecting that they would, and even before that actually happened, we were discussing with our networks the potential need to do kind of independent radiation monitoring in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, after anything happened. In other words, after access was restored. We were talking about that, and then later that same day, the news came through that Russian forces had occupied the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. And this was really alarming. Uh, and at the same time, news came through that when they occupied, or shortly after they moved into the power plant, that there were the radiation sensors in the exclusion zone and around the plant showed a spike of radiation. And so we immediately, got into and investigate that, and find out what we could, about what was happening and what the sensors were showing, etc. So to jump back to, to reassure people, there it doesn't appear to be any major leak of radiation, any particular radiation related accident happening now. There was a spike, and we're trying to figure out what caused it. But and then the sensors went offline. The data was unavailable for several days, like bing, spike, and then nothing. So it was impossible to confirm. But there was some of the sensors before they went offline had returned back to what they were before. So back to sort of normal levels, normal for Chernobyl, which is of course is elevated radiation. Uh, and then they came back on a few days later. And then went off again. So it's a bit unstable. But the point is that nuclear facilities, whether it's a nuclear power plant, whether it is a reprocessing plant, whether it is a radioactive waste storage, these are very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable in times of war. I mean, nuclear power plants are generally built to withstand an airplane crash, but they're not built to withstand missiles or artillery shells. So and what we're seeing with the Russian invasion is they are hitting everything. There lots of civilian facilities. It's almost like they're not really aiming, and so much can go wrong. It's abominable. And to send a military force to occupy a nuclear power plant, this is unprecedented. IAEA has spoken out strongly against it. Uh, there's a proposal, which we don't know how it could be enforced, to establish a 30-kilometer no weapon zone around all of the nuclear facilities in Ukraine. But Russia has gone into Chernobyl. They've gone into another power plant further south in the nation, which is a very, very large one. Again, there's no indication of any damage to the power plant or release of radiation. But on the other hand, just a few days ago, I mean, like the day following the Chernobyl occupation, the news came out that a shell had hit a radioactive waste repository in Ukraine, south of Kiev. And again, our network got involved. We looked and people located it. And um, uh, fortunately, it only hit the fence. It didn't damage any of the containers for the radioactive waste. So, and there was no apparent release of radiation. But again, it could have been horrible. So this is something that's very alarming, and I'm spending a lot of time networking with people, with experts about these issues and trying to find out what's happening. So yeah, it's alarming. It could so far we're okay on that situation, but the potential for a horrific accident, horrific disaster is very very present.
Thanks for that update. It's really important to have information,
Yeah.
and it seems really hard to get that kind of information. I've put the link for Safecast. You
Yeah.
mentioned that you
There's
might be doing an
Safecast.
update.
I will be writing updates. I have mainly been posting on the Safecast Twitter feed. I have a few updates there, which people can look at, and it's ready for another update. Because here's the thing about the radiation spikes. People are going, "What was it? Did they maybe damage a building or something?" And well, it doesn't look like it. So quickly, an expert consensus emerged that it was because of moving lots of heavy vehicles, military vehicles, through the exclusion zone that probably raised dust that was detected by the sensors, and then the dust settled, and that could explain it. But there was always other possibilities. Now, some of us are looking at the possibility that it was radio interference from the military vehicles or something else, a radar or something that caused kind of a glitch in the systems, because not all of them showed a spike. Many of them did, but some close by, one would and one wouldn't. So it's very odd. So maybe it was something else. So we're still trying to figure that out. And I will be trying to write an update about that too. So yes, it's the Safecast Twitter feed right now has more information about that.
Okay.
And um, lately, I've been gathering information about humanitarian assistance because I hope people understand that the Russian invasion plan has apparently not gone the way they expected it to. It's taken a lot longer. They really seem to have expected the Ukrainians to surrender quickly, but they're not. And this incredible heroism we're seeing from the Ukrainian people. But what the Russian military does, what they've done in Chechnya, in Syria, is simply blast cities to bits. They're an artillery army. Many experts point out they bring in the big guns, the big bombs, and just blast everything. And this is what they have planned for Kiev. People are evacuating. We've heard yesterday about 1 million people have already, are refugees, moved out of Ukraine, but a lot more people need to go out. And they need a lot of assistance to organize that, to get the buses, to get these things, to get people out. At the same time, there's a huge need, and will be an even bigger need, for humanitarian assistance to move in medicine, food, water, generators, everything, blankets, you name it. So I have sent a few links for groups that I think have been well vetted by the people who shared them with me. They're kind of divided into two categories. One is primarily humanitarian assistance. Another one is primarily, or includes, military assistance, because there's a lot of donations of money to the Ukrainian military as well, and to groups outside who are providing weapons for the Ukrainians. I could understand a lot of people don't want to send their money for that, for whatever reason, but there are others that really are focusing on humanitarian assistance, and there's some links for those. So I encourage everybody to try to help out that way. And it's an astounding time. It's extremely distressing, and I think a lot of people have a hard time sleeping. And I'm in touch with people in Ukraine, and it's like, don't even tell me where you are. Don't need to know where you are, but they're all the men basically are fighting, uh, and it's yeah, a terrible situation. So
Thank you so much for that update. And I have added your links for humanitarian aid as well as getting more information about the situation in Chernobyl on the
yeah,
chat, which should be available to everyone. I'll make sure it's below as
great.
well.
Yeah,
Now,
thanks.
Azby, you and I are both presenting at the Minka Summit coming up end of April.
Yeah.
You have been working on an interesting project. You said you might be talking about.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the summit, and I know you had Alex Karn the other day, and he's also looking forward to it, and because it's the first time to do anything like that, and it's interesting that it's organized primarily by non-Japanese, and it'll have a lot of non-Japanese and a lot of Japanese there, I'm sure. Uh, and I've been thinking about what to present about. You know, unlike people like Alex, he has really built and designed quite a lot of restorations of Minka. And my work, I've done less of that and more talking about the big picture, how, historically Japanese society was very, very sustainable, explaining how a farmstead, a Kominka, and the surroundings function together environmentally, socially, etc. So that's, I think, what I will be talking about. And as part of that, as you mentioned, yeah, I've been involved with a project since last year with a group called Chiwake no Mori. And it's interesting because their focus is forestry, and they've done a number of other projects and workshops. They have ongoing projects about restoration and craftsmanship and a lot of things, but their focus is on regenerative forestry. And they were introduced to people who own a very old kominka in Chiba, in Shonan, a place called Kuramochi, which is about 300 years old. And it was lived in until fairly recently. Certainly 50 years ago, I think even 20 years ago, they were still living in it. And it's on kind of a hillside over a small valley. And it has a fairly intact Satoyama. So Satoyama, I think a lot of your viewers know, is the forest surrounding an agricultural village traditionally that was used for providing firewood. People would collect the wood that fell down and use that for their firewood, for their fuel, and also for gathering food, sansai, wild vegetables and herbs and mushrooms and things. So the focus of this is to try to restore both the forest and the Kominka building itself and the agricultural fields as an educational project. And, as we know, a lot of people want to restore Minka to live in them. And as Alex was talking about the other day, lots of municipalities, towns have restored old houses as part of their tourist push. And there's a lot of reasons to do it. But this is sort of what can we do to restore it and build a community that is sort of educationally oriented and that's thinking about what restoration means. What does it mean to restore? What are we restoring? Why are we restoring it? Who are we restoring it for? So I think it's a very interesting project. It's just getting off the ground. It's been launched. The photo you showed was of this sort of, launch of the project. We had an event, one-day event at the site, and we have other events coming up. And of course, there needs some fundraising. The local government is very interested, wants to be involved, but it's not clear, how much funding they will provide. But, all over Japan, small towns are emptying out. They're aging. Young people are not there. Most of the Kominka projects that I've seen are in, other parts of the country. Maybe it's Nagano, maybe it's Shimane, maybe it's, even Kyushu or someplace, or, Shiga. But this is close to Tokyo. You can get there in about an hour from Tokyo. So there is really a great potential for it to, connect with and have an impact and inform people in the Tokyo area. So we're looking forward to it. Who knows how it'll go? There's a historical research that has to happen, and then great team of architects and builders who are already on board, people with good experience doing historical restoration and reconstruction, and also good carpenters who have done a lot of Kominka restoration. So I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, wonderful. And even just looking at those beautiful big old beams that are exposed, which you're seeing more and more in remodeled Akiya and Minka around Japan, these projects and builders who are willing to work with old houses to show the beautiful old aesthetic is
Yeah.
kind of new, right?
Yeah. This is one of the things. Often old, farmhouses in Japan that have been in use until recently, they've been remodeled a lot on the interior. And maybe they have a new ceiling, and maybe the walls are covered up with paneling or something. This one isn't. This one is just like it was. And above the irori, the rafters, the roof beams, and there's some bamboo, what would you call it? Sort of a bamboo ceiling up there. It's soot darkened. It's just aged in this beautiful way, and just like it is. It's a very unusual to find a Kominka now in that condition, I think. So, it needs some structural work. Part of it, the floor is rotted. This sort of thing happens. It needs some work, but basically, it really speaks to people having lived a very similar lifestyle for generations and for centuries in this same place. So I think it's really, really great.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And
I
that
think you hear
leads.
my dog barking.
It's okay.
Lulu's yapping.
It's fine. It leads perfectly into talking about your book.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have talked about Just Enough in the series before.
Mm-hmm.
You've been talking recently about how it seems like it has more relevance and people are more perceptive to the ideas of circular economy and sustainable living.
Yeah.
You had a great TED talk the other day,
Mm.
really making that connection
Yeah.
between what is circular economy and how did Japanese people live in the Edo Jidai in a very circular way.
Yeah. It's interesting because, again, you know, Just Enough was published around 2010. And that's a while back, and there was a fair amount of interest at the time from people interested in sustainability. I wrote it specifically for that, and because of what I had been learning from people in different parts of the world who are working on sustainability issues. And at the time, for instance, one person and one project that I thought was very worthwhile was called Cradle to Cradle. And this is, a play on the cradle to grave notion that you make a product and it has a life cycle and then you get rid of it, you discard it. So, and they were saying, this was William McDonough, who's a well-known sustainable architect, and a partner had written this book and done this organization, is to say, no, everything we use should go from cradle back to cradle. It should not be recycled or downcycled, because almost everything we recycle eventually becomes landfill or needs to be incinerated. It may go through several incarnations, plastic PET bottles, polythene bottles becoming some kind of rough plastic, road barriers, becoming eventually landfill. So he's saying, no, we have to find a way to upcycle things, to bring them back to the top. So one of the interesting things is that the circular economy theory, and we have to give a lot of credit to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who funded some very important studies and research and publications back, I say 2013 was really when their big studies came out aimed at business about circular economy. And they said very clearly, yes, we are synthesizing many streams of thought, including cradle to cradle, including the blue economy, including mottainai, including other things. Of course, now we have the Sustainable Development Goals. So it's a synthesis, which is really remarkable. Lots of people and projects that were sort of working in the same direction now have been pulled together under the term circular economy. And what I've been pointing out is that if you look at how Edo period Japan handled its resources and its environment, it basically checks off everything on the list for circular economy. It basically is a prototype for that. How does that work in reality, in a social sense, in a material sense, in an economic sense? So I'm talking about that. Yes, we did. There was a TEDx Ogikubo a couple of months ago that I where I mentioned that. I talked about that specifically. So yeah, it's everything we do should regenerate the environment. Everything should somehow improve the environment at this point. And an example from Cradle to Cradle was McDonough and his design firm had worked on factories that purified the water. You know, uh, basically the water was cleaner when it came out than when it went in. That's how things should work. We know it's possible. We have the technology, we have the know-how to do that, and of course they do that using sort of organic biological processes. They're not pumping it through, osmotic filters or anything. They're using sort of artificial wetlands, etc., which absorb the pollutants and clean the water. So things can work this way. This is really an important vision for the future for us. So there's a lot to learn. And
Definitely. You mentioned the Satoyama before.
yeah,
That seems to be a key foundational aspect of the Satoyama. Things come
absolutely.
from the mountains and using natural gravity go through the agricultural fields.
Yeah,
And then the nutrients from growing the vegetables organically, of course, are very good going out to sea and as part of the whole ecosystem. It
yeah,
doesn't really work like that when you add chemicals and you're
right.
damaging the water systems as they go through, right?
Yeah. Well, and yes, basically Edo period Japan, and this was true in many parts of the world at this time in the pre-industrial era, and in some places continued even afterward to some degree. Yes, the water system for agriculture was based on gravity, was using the natural watershed, the creeks, the natural ponds as much as possible, maybe modifying them a bit, maybe making a few new channels, but not destroying it and not modifying it so much that it stops functioning in a natural way. And this was, brilliant. And ultimately, yes, as the water would go through the rice paddies, and again, this water, more recent experiments have shown the water comes out cleaner than it did when it went in. So this is a great model and a great and important principle to keep in mind. Again, speaking of regeneration, the Japanese did it in every aspect. Certainly, Satoyama was, you'd call it a managed forest. I mean, people would go in, it was natural, but of course they would modify it and help certain species of trees or other plants that were useful or beneficial. They would help those grow, maybe, clear out some that were not so useful, but again, never damaging the natural functioning of the forest. Really looking at it as a resource, and it was again managed, but it wasn't turned into agriculture or a plantation. There were lots of forest plantations in Japan in the Edo period. Lots of monocultures of sugi of cedar trees or hinoki cypress trees, etc. And this is was a trade-off for them at the time. A lot of mixed forests, changed from that to being monocultures of evergreens, which we still have. But it was regenerative. They developed principles that and this was enforced by regulations, that if you cut trees, you have to replant them. You can't just clear cut a hillside and leave it bare. You have to replant the forests after you cut them. And of course, if you cut one tree and you want another one to replace it, you have to plant about five because they won't all survive, and you'll need to thin them out and keep the healthier specimens. So this was a principle that it maybe took the better part of a century. The first part of the 1600s to really become widespread. But it was very, very effective, and we should learn from that as well. So yeah, regeneration. They regenerated the agricultural fields. I mean, this is
And
remarkable.
it's really important to remind people that
Mhm.
unfortunately, a lot of these great practices of sustainable living and sustainable farming are not used in modern Japan
Right.
anymore. But the inspiring thing about looking back at Edo Jidai and Edo society, like you do so beautifully in this book, is talking about how they were coming back from environmental destruction and lack of resources.
Yeah.
And we are in a very similar kind of crisis right now. So if they could do it back in the day without technology, there are some basic principles we can take to
Right.
our modern world and hopefully use the same kind of mentality in a way that'll help us be more sustainable. Isn't that the basic concept?
Absolutely. I mean, we look at like the challenges that we have now environmentally. Um, of course, climate change, global warming is a big one, which the Edo period fortunately did not have. They were at a very good period in terms of global climate. But the difficulty providing enough food, the pressures of a large population, problems with the forest, a lot of the issues were the same ones that we have. We have desertification, we have basically deforestation all around the world, and we have a huge population pressures which are stressing the food supply. But the Japanese had the same pressures on a localized scale, and they dealt with it using tools that didn't make any of those problems worse, really. And we're fortunate now that we have so many tools available, whether it's technology in terms of machinery, digital information systems, sensor systems, transportation. We can move things around, we can do all this stuff, but a lot of them don't avoid making the problem worse. And certainly our energy system is one of the big ones. All the fossil fuel based systems that we still are using that have carbon. And we look at, what are the non-fossil fuel based sources? And of course, nuclear comes up as one. Low carbon once it's in operation, but we have all these other potential problems from that we see now, sitting on pins and needles, looking at what's happening in Ukraine. But the Edo period was very good in what we would call appropriate technology, and
Let's
this.
talk about some of those practical things
Mm,
that they had, which we need to bring back. So, for example, very simply, they had people who repaired things
yeah,
and found ways of using their resources in many different recycled circular ways, but using it as long as possible, right?
yeah, yeah. And again, this is a key principle of circular economy: is to repair. One thing is to use things as long as possible. That's the key. Keep them in use as long as possible. So you have your device, your furniture, your appliance or whatever, your automobile. Keep that, repair it. Keep repairing it as long as you can. And when you really want to replace it, don't junk it. Uh, Put it back into the economic cycle to be resold, to be perhaps refurbished. Increasingly, manufacturers are prepared to do that, to refurbish appliances, et cetera, and then put them back on sale. Keep these things in sale as used goods. You flashed a picture of a used clothing seller from Edo. People were commonly wearing used clothing. They were like 500 used clothing sellers or something in Edo, and including itinerant peddlers who would carry them down the street, and some that were in shops. And people are doing that all the time. Yeah, I'm tired of this kimono. I'm going to go get a new one, and they trade it in. pay a little bit to get one that's been refurbished and cleaned up that they like. This is something that, of course, we can do. We're awash. We're swamped by fast fashion, and you can't even give it away. You can't even send clothes to lots of developing nations anymore because they have too much. So keeping things in use is the key. And if the device, the item, the furniture, can't be, or the building can't be reused or resold or refurbished, then take it apart and reuse the components, whatever it's made of. And in the Edo period, most things were made of wood. I mean, it was a wood society, and wood is very easy to reuse for a lot of things, if nothing else, as fuel to burn it at the very end. And I have pointed out in my book and other talks that I was amazed to learn that there were lumber yards, lumber dealers in Edo and in other cities in Japan at the time that sold only used timber, the big beams and columns and things. And Japan has this modular traditional architectural system where things were of similar dimensions, and basically you could get wood that was going to probably be the right size to be reused somewhere else. So that was reused. And this links into another principle that we're hearing more about now, buildings as material banks. And there's actually an organization, BAMB, which is promoting this. And they are trying to, get people to buy into the idea that a building should be considered a temporary place that materials are used. And at the end of use of that building, the materials should then be reusable. Not that it's going to be destroyed and then again become landfill or something like that, but that we should design buildings so that they can be more easily dismantled and reused, that the resources that go into it are being borrowed for a few decades, however long. Hopefully buildings are going to stay in use longer, for centuries, but if we can't do that, then let's make them dismantleable and reusable. And of course, Japanese buildings, Japanese architecture, whether it's a farmhouse or a castle or a temple or anything, they were done that way. They could be dismantled and everything could be reused. So I think it's a wonderful principle. I think we'll hear more about that. BAMB, buildings as material banks.
I
And
love that idea.
yeah, it's
And
a vision.
Alex Kerr was talking about that and
Yeah.
feeling gutted. And I have that same feeling. You feel gutted when you see perfectly good materials being all smashed together when houses come down, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
why don't they at least keep some parts that we
It
can
hurts, right?
reuse,
It hurts, right? I'm looking, and I'm like that, and maybe you are, and he is going. You're looking at things that I could reuse that. I could use that board. Oh, what a nice board, and
Yeah.
a lot of people I know are like
Or
that.
even, like when they use those crushers
The
and
crusher,
they
this
take
big
apart
claw
the
thing, the
house,
big claw.
you can see all the materials
Yeah,
and appliances or
yeah,
mirrors
yeah,
or cabinetry
yeah.
that definitely could be reused in some
But
way, right?
nowadays, okay, of course, and the only reason it's done that way is because of the cost, because it would take too long, or there would not be a good enough business if crews were going in and taking things apart, dismantling them with an eye towards reusing them. One of the reasons is the use of a lot of adhesives and things. Things are glued together rather than fastened or jointed together. So, it's hard to separate, panels from beams and things. But on the other hand, metal gets recycled pretty well. A steel building is pretty recyclable. I mean, that stuff definitely goes to the metal scrapyard and gets reused. A lot of things like copper pipes and, even wires, those things were likely to get recycled. They'll be messed up on the truck, but eventually, often in many cases, they do go through, a process of recycling the metals, but the wood rarely does. So, it could be used in many cases for energy. There are municipalities that do that. that are burning scrap wood, for municipal energy. And in other parts of the world, it's even more common in some parts of Europe. But yeah, it seems to be a huge waste, right? And I think I wish this message would get through. On this note, I was asked to do a talk earlier. Actually, it was the end of last year. It was in Nihonbashi, and it was the Mitsui Real Estate has sponsored a series of events to highlight the history of Nihonbashi and what they're doing in terms of redevelopment. Now, I'm not very fond of that redevelopment. Maybe they're listening. It's too big. They've actually demolished the neighborhoods that existed. Which had, of course, burned down in the 1920s, 1923 earthquake, and then were bombed during the Second War. They were post-war neighborhoods, but they still had the texture and scale, maintained a lot of the texture and scale, the back
Is
streets
this
of
your
Edo.
sketch of the original
This is Nihonbashi, yeah. The
Nihonbashi, right?
bridge and the river, and there's the fish markets on either side, and you could see the castle. You could actually see Mount Fuji from there. And this was the major economic, merchant district of Edo, and it still maintained that well until the post-war period. Basically, sort of moved to Ginza, later in the Meiji period, but this still was an important economic center. But now it's been redeveloped, huge, office buildings and hotels and commercial buildings, etc. But I was talking to, the person from the real estate company. I said, do you know about buildings as material banks? And I was like, no. And I said, well, what do you think? It would be great if a company like yours would start to do it this way, to look at the materials going into the building as simply being borrowed and that they're going to be reused later. This would have a huge positive impact. And he kind of made this strained face and says, well, we focus on making our buildings, have a long lifespan by being able to be, having their functional use changed. So pretty much he's talking about interior renovations and things like that. I said, yeah, okay, that's good. But really, big real estate companies, big general contractors embrace this principle. It could be hugely beneficial.
Yeah.
So
And
I'll do
you've
what I can
planted that seed. You've planted the seed in
I
there.
hope so.
It might grow. It
Yeah.
might be there. It
But
might ruminate.
the guy didn't go, hey, that's a great idea. He was like, like they'd have to change.
Yeah,
They have to change the way they're doing everything.
definitely.
And this is
Definitely.
this. I don't want to say hypocrisy, but this is this, disconnect between
Yeah.
wanting to benefit and highlight Edo period principles and thinking and lifestyle, while not really going very far to actually embrace it on a real level. So
Yeah.
we'll see a lot of that. There's a kind of greenwash we see. We see a lot of
But
that with the SDGs.
I see
Mm,
changes coming from
I
the
do too.
consumer
Yeah, yeah,
aspect, from consumer demand for these changes, more sustainable changes, more sustainable products and services, even more sustainable travel. And Alex Kerr, his project in Chiodi, had a great positive effect, not only for international visitors and residents, but Japanese domestic market was also embracing this idea of bringing the old traditions into modern relevance, right?
yes.
So, bringing this idea from your book of bringing back some of these concepts into modern relevance are relevant,
I,
very
I
accessible.
hope so. I hope so. And you know, um, there's two things that are interesting in this relationship. One is, a lot of people, they may have a fuzzy idea. They may be inclined, or they may just not know of the possibilities. But when they see something like Chiori, when they see something that's actually been done, they can appreciate it. They can say, oh, wow, yeah, this is possible. Oh, this is good. Um, it's a question of vision, or lack of vision, lack of being able to really imagine what it would be like, imagine what goes into it, imagine how it works. Uh, it's a lack of imagination, really, and most of us, we really struggle with that. So, but if you actually see it, if someone does it, uh, whether it's a building, whether it's a new garment, whether it's a new way to, use water, people go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. I think I'll embrace that. And then it becomes largely an economic and convenience question. Well, is this going to impact my lifestyle in a negative way? Is it going to cause me hassle? Is this something I want to do? So I think you've had someone on the person who did the compost bag thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the idea, yeah, just have a bag in your kitchen. You just put the compost in, and then someone will come. You can deal with it, or someone will come cart it off and bring you a new bag, kind of a thing. This is brilliant, and that does not, cause inconvenience, and it's easy to do, and that's a brilliant idea. And once people see it, they go, yeah, that's a great idea.
It's like the first time I mentioned to people that I was doing a lot of research and really
Mm.
excited about Kamikatsu and how
Yes,
they're going towards zero waste and
yes.
separating your garbage into 45 categories. And most of the people I said that to, Japanese or international, would all go, "What? No, that sounds awful," you
Right.
know? But then now people are coming around to this idea. When I
Yeah,
separate my garbage and it's burnt, it's creating more
yeah,
problems.
yeah.
There is no just get rid of it, right?
Right. And a place like Kamikatsu is, again, it's a model, and of course it's municipal. The town is supporting this. There, this is the direction, the vision of the town and its identity, and the buildings, the architecture is wonderful. The new buildings they've built, and it's something palpable, and are going there. Become a tourist attraction in its own right. People go there just to see to just see what's happening and how they're doing it.
And directly connected to you, Asby, and this book, when you check in at the Y Zero Waste Hotel, they ask you, please choose exactly how much soap you need. Please
Yeah.
choose only how much tea you need, how much
Right.
coffee you need,
Right.
and please use it up
Yes.
for your stay.
Yeah.
And that is directly
Yes.
connected to just enough. I love it.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, I'm one of those people who's fond of taking home the little shampoo bottles and, using them on my next trip or something. But yeah, there are better ways to do that. I really appreciate that. So, this comes to the other point, is we do have a rise in what's called the values-based consumer. And this is all over the world, and Japan, researchers I've spoken with, and definitely market research shows there is an increase, and it is largely, there's sort of a dividing line based on age. It tends to be younger people, because there are a lot of people in Japan who are very, very habit oriented, who want to continue living, the same way. And this is very understandable. People value stability, familiarity, but we do have an increase in values-based consumers who will make choices based on environmental impact, and especially if the items that are available are also beautifully designed. And we're seeing more and more that this is one of the things that Japan really has to offer, is a beautiful design of things that are also environmentally sound, and, let's say, sustainable. So it could be architecture, it could be, again, household items. A simple example is a great resurgence in well-made wooden furniture. Of course, you can go to IKEA, you can go to a cheap furniture store and get something, but there are good furniture companies all around the country, that are making very, very solid, durable wooden furniture that will last generations, something that can be prized, something that will become an heirloom. And I see this highlighted more and more in interior design magazines, in other, showcases of lifestyle. So it's going to be more expensive, but it will last, forever. And there's a lot of people doing that. At the time when I first came to Japan, really one of the only places doing that was Oak Village, in Hida Takayama, and they sort of started this trend years ago. I remember they marketed the 100-year desk. It was like, don't buy a cheap, study desk for your kid. Buy one that your grandchildren will also be able to use.
I
Right?
love
Yeah.
that. And
Yeah.
when I visited Silicon Valley,
Mm.
the beautiful Apple shop and museum and rest area upstairs where you can view the trees of their facility, That is made, it's kind of secret, but it's made by beautiful wood makers in
Hmm.
Japan.
I
And
didn't know that.
yeah, so they
Mm-hmm.
don't publicize that, but it is
Mm-hmm.
becoming an export factor for
Yeah.
Japanese brand as well. It's not just
Yes.
something we really revere in Japan. Of course we do.
Yeah.
But it's a great thing to export, and we have more than enough wood to use. We need that money to help with forest maintenance, right?
Yes. 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 I mean, that's a big point. And yeah, Japanese forests are abandoned all over the country. I mean, basically, this is again the economics that it's cheaper to import wood in most cases, and if purchase cost is the primary consideration, well, that's what people will do. But if we think of the other costs, the embodied energy, the transportation, the carbon output involved in importing this timber, also from places where maybe it's not being cut in a sustainable fashion either. There may be exploitation, it may be other environmental damage that's simply not happening in Japan. This can change because, again, there's lots of forests that really need to be cut. They need to be cut for the health of the forests themselves, to be thinned out so that the forests can become stronger and healthier. So this is, again, part of the project that I'm involved with in Chiba, with the Chiwake no Mori group, is to highlight this and to try to, promote uh, renewable forestry or restorative forestry. So I think it's an important thing, and it can happen. It should happen all over. And again, if people want to know how the Japanese do things, I mean, there's still this mystery, this wonderful mystery factor. And I see all sorts of YouTube videos of the mystery of Japanese carpentry, and this, as if it's magic. It's the spiritual side of it. People are very, very attracted by this, and they want somehow to absorb those values and to have that be part of their life as well. Uh, it, People hear, well, it's not that mysterious. You cut it this way, you do it this way. This is how we do it. But from overseas, there's this wonderful mystery involved, and that's, again, a big sales point. It's something that Japan can offer, is a deeper sense of meaning to the things we use.
Well, that plays perfectly into the mentality of your the concept of sustainability in the Edo Jidai of
Hmm.
just enough.
Yeah.
This beautiful Zen balance. Can you tell us about this?
Okay, this is an illustration of a water basin, Tsukubai, at Ryoanji Temple in Kyoto, which is the famous temple with the most famous rock garden, the white gravel and the stones spread out, a very famous Zen garden. And this water basin, uh, you can see a square in the middle, and that square is part of the four characters that surround it. All of these characters have this square, which means mouth, and in Japanese it's ware, tada, taru, shiru, and that is kind of a rebus. It's kind of you know a puzzle even, and can be translated as I only care about enough. I only need enough. All I need is enough. And this is a big principle, and it, of course, it's key to Zen thinking, which is all about avoiding anything inessential, in your life, not wanting possessions, to avoid wanting to have things, to avoid wanting to be admired by your society, avoiding wanting to have something, and uh, to empty out mentally and spiritually. And of course, this is very difficult to achieve in reality, which is why stories of monks who achieve enlightenment, satori, they're infrequent and important lessons. How did he achieve satori? And maybe you can as well. But for us, it's a path. It is not necessarily a goal. It's a path. It is, if you live keeping this in mind, perhaps your life will be better, and it will be better for all of creation as well. An interesting thing about Japan, though, I mean, Zen Buddhism, of course, it's Buddhism came from India. Zen Buddhism really came from China, but Japan has the Shinto religion as well, which is, animistic. All of nature is gods. There are demons as well. These are deities, whether it's a mountain, a river, a rock, even the sky, the sun, the wind. Many trees themselves are considered deities, and of course, people can also become deities. But the key is the place of humanity, the place of a human within that, and it's very different from what Western culture has become, where humans are considered the top of a hierarchy, and even in the Bible, one of the messages people have taken from it is that God gave gave mankind the world to dominate and to use, and that the world is a gift to man. And of course, we can see how that value has led to a lot of problems of overuse or poor use or exploitation, damage. It can be used as an excuse. Shinto thinking doesn't. It's no, balance is important. You always have to maintain balance, and the balance of human needs against the needs of the rest of the world. So this works together, I think, with this Zen thinking of Taruo Shiro, of just enough. I think to sort of limit, to keep the brakes on human use of resources. And there are counterexamples. There are certainly cases, like I mentioned, they did deforest the country before the Edo period, which is why it was so difficult. It was really, facing the potential of big environmental collapse, which had to be stopped. And was successfully stopped, which is what I talk about in the book. But this notion of balance and humans really thinking about how to meet their needs while not damaging the environment, and really taking care of creation. This is the key value.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the balance between people, planet, and profits as well, right? You have to make a living,
Yeah,
but you have to take care of your environment and you have to take care of people. Otherwise, we don't have a future, right? So it's that finding a balance, finding a better way forward, which doesn't inconvenience us too much, but we know there are better options.
right.
I think that is the path we need to take, right?
Well, and as I point out in the book, the economic motive was very strong for almost everything Japanese did that led to sustainable systems. They were making money by recycling. They were somehow preserving their the basis of their businesses by taking good care of the environment where the resources were coming from. People were making money doing this. Nothing happened by diktat. Rarely, in rare cases, did the government say, you must do it this way. It was, we're looking at a picture of a public bath. Yeah, this was simply economical. To have more people using the hot water in the bath than having each household have their own bath and use more fuel, etc. It was economically beneficial. They could have a business. They saved money doing that. The same for other recycling. People saved money. You could sell reused ash or your reused cooking oil or whatever, not just your clothes or your the floorboards from your house. You could resell all this stuff. And it's interesting that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation in their publications targeted primarily towards business, to say these are opportunities. These are all of the. Here's a list. Here's 60 pages that will describe the new business opportunities that will open up as circular economic thinking is adopted, and it's all about business. So there are lots of potentials. It doesn't mean people have a worse lifestyle. We see from the Edo example that, in fact, they were able to have a steadily increasing lifestyle, certainly in terms of health, certainly in terms of nutrition, certainly in terms of quality of housing, certainly in terms of quality of clothing. And literacy was increasing at the same time. This was actually lots of benefits all across the board. And so we know theoretically from that example that this can be done. I think, we have to look at what is stopping it? What is preventing this from happening? And of course, it's sort of, business as usual, entrenched practices and habits, and the difficulty or the resistance on industry or even government to change businesses to develop these new opportunities.
Yeah. And racing towards the cliff, I've heard that expression, right? Like
Yeah,
use up and get all your profits now because we know it's going to not exist. So let's take
it's
our money
frightening, but
now.
again, if we look at this conflict in Ukraine, ultimately, what is that about? Now we know Putin is what can we say? He's a dictator. He's a madman. He wants to restore the Soviet Union and the Russian Empire. This really is his aim. Uh, but ultimately, people, the businessmen, the oligarchs, the rest will buy into something like that because of the resources, because the energy sources can be
Or
useful and
financial
profitable, because
incentives,
the
right?
agricultural resources can be profitable and beneficial for them. There are fundamental pressures, often caused by population, caused by what's happening in the rest of the world. There are pressures usually underneath every conflict, often that come back to resource problems, population, food. Again, climate change is exacerbating all of these, so they are connected. They are connected, and we hope that we have, cooperative, collaborative solutions, as we do for, by and large, the business world. It is making deals, and not always fair, but basically it's making deals. We have these resources, and we'll give you this instead, and you can use this money for something else. And this hopefully is a better system. But to do it by force is horrific, and it's been happening for a long time in other parts of the world. Now we see it happening in Central Europe. So um,
I
this should
think
be a wake up call.
definitely. Circling back to that,
Mm.
uh, being more sustainable because it feels good as a part of your own personal brand of the person you want to be, how you want to live your life, how you want to work, how you want to travel. I think this idea of a fundamental change in priorities can really have a big effect on the businesses we support, the policymakers we put in office. And I take that from your book as one of the key takeaways, I think, is
Mm.
how we are defining ourselves and the people we want to be. And it feels good to make more sustainable choices.
I like that. I think you're right. And for me personally, it becomes, what kind of people do you connect with as you're trying to learn more? And for me, that's been a great thing. This is building communities of like-minded people, and most of the people I know who really work on these issues, the sustainability issues, environmental issues, they're really interesting people, and always have, and generally fun to be with, and renegades. A lot of them are renegades, and I really like that kind of community. So yeah, uh, for me, by and large, it's internal. What am I thinking about? What am I trying to promote? I don't really care so much about advertising it on a day-to-day basis. Hey, I'm being sustainable, but I'm writing about this stuff and trying to promote it in this way. uh, but it's about the people. So
Yeah. One of the questions I get asked a lot, and I'm sure you do as well, Asby, is how do you stay focused? How do you not get overwhelmed by all the meta problems and all the big issues that it seems so impossible to fix?
I do get overwhelmed. I mean, I won't lie. I do, of course. But I'm fortunate in terms of my temperament. I think I'm able to compartmentalize. I'm able to focus on things. When I need to focus on things. Um, but of course, I have to take care of myself, and it may mean walking the dog. It may mean sitting down and just reading something funny. Instead, or reading a novel. There's a lot of self-care that we have to do. And of course, we know that through this pandemic. And of course, I'm focusing a lot on what's happening in Ukraine, and that's really stressful. That's really traumatic too. So you have to take care of yourself. I But again, I'm fortunate. I can sort of focus and mentally block things out for a while, for a few hours or whatever, better part of a day to work on something like that. So, but you got to be out there. I mean, lately I'm making sure I'm trying to do a couple of hours of manual labor every day, and like I said, spend time with the dog and you know, relax at night and go to sleep and try to sleep well. So
It's really important,
yeah.
self-care.
Mm.
I think you can also feel really good about the information you have put out there in the world, that we
Mhm.
have talked about in
Yeah.
today's show, but also about Japanese carpentry and the
Mm.
inspiration you're giving people
Mm.
to look back on more sustainable
Mm.
traditions and habits from Japan.
It's really gratifying, to hear that, and I'm always gratified to hear from people who've read the books or who've heard a talk and who want to know more. And yeah, it's very gratifying. I'm not doing it for that reason necessarily, but it's a wonderful, result. And at this point, I've been doing this for a long time. Right? It's 30 years of my life spent working on these issues and writing about these issues and trying to promote them and popularize them. So it's great that I'm kind of an old timer, at this point, and it's wonderful to see the generations that have come after who are building on that, who are taking it to the next level. That's another incredibly gratifying thing to see. So it's all about that. It's all about passing it on and hopefully inspiring people and helping people learn and so they can do what they want to do in their own way, maybe going in the same general direction.
Fantastic. I just want to shout out to some of the great comments we've had along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Tova says, "I love the BAM concept that you talked
Mm-hmm.
about.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, BAMB,
Right.
reusing the resources from buildings. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We had another from Rich Young on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn. This is
Mm-hmm.
a great idea. We looked at Kominka and Hyogo that was
Mm-hmm.
built 500 years ago and was remodeled 150 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Then, when we saw it, the second remodeling was underway. How
Mm-hmm.
exciting!
Yeah.
You don't see many houses that old anymore,
Uh,
right?
not that many. Yeah. So a lot of the Kominka we're seeing are Meiji period, even or later. We do see a fair number of Edo period buildings becoming available, to be remodeled, etc. They're there. I mean, they're there, but we see, a lot of them. Even a Meiji period building, uh, it's very, very traditional, and especially in rural areas, they maintain most of the same kinds of layout and construction, and really, really beautiful. I've seen quite a few in Fukushima, for instance, some wonderful old samurai houses, and often in many parts of the country, samurai were also doing farming and lived in basically kominka. So I'm looking at those, and some that date from the Meiji period, even, that were the same family, but then they built a new house later, and it's the same kind of house. So it's great.
Also, Kyle on YouTube says, "It's nice watching your discussions on environmental aspects on YouTube. Keep moving forward." Thank you,
Thanks, Kyle.
Kyle. And those insights about Minka and restorations, of
Mm,
course, we
mm,
will dive into at the
mm-hmm.
Minka Summit over
Uh-huh.
those 3 days
And you're
with
going to be
workshops.
there, right?
I'm going to
You'll
be there. You're going to be
Great.
there.
And there's some
Um,
people that I have never met in person who also be there. I think it's going to be great, and some people that I know, of course. I really look forward to it.
And even if some of the events are full now,
Mm.
I think they're going to have outdoor workshops. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
be able to walk through some Kominka with
Mm-hmm.
experts like you and
Mm-hmm.
Alex Kerr, I think, and you
Right.
can point out some of the
Right.
key features. Very exciting.
Yeah, it'll be great.
Awesome. Well, thank you once again, Azby. It's wonderful talking to you, and I'm looking forward to getting my paperback version of Just Enough. So,
Yep.
just to shout out, you can
Mm-hmm.
order it now, but
Right.
it won't be published until the beginning of April, right?
Yes, I think that the publication date from Stonebridge Press is April 10th. Let's see, how long it takes to get books to Japan, etc. But yes, we're looking at April, and there's always, especially the last couple of years, supply chain issues, etc. So I'm just hoping there's no real delays after that. But yes, so you can go ahead and order it. It is largely the same book, the primary content, new forward, sort of looking at the situation now, 10 years after the original came out. And then I've updated a lot of the sections, what we call lessons. So after each section, including, some information about current situation and sustainability practices and needs, etc. So I've updated some of those, but basically it's the same book, same illustrations.
Yeah, I
Oh, I
love
also updated the resources, the
the
reading.
resource.
I
Yeah,
put
there's a
a lot,
great
added a lot more resources in it. Yeah,
resource chart for building materials,
yeah,
for example.
it
All
has
of your
that.
sketches are in there, which are
Yeah,
so wonderful from the original book.
thanks.
But you also have more updates about how these concepts are being adopted
Yes.
by the United
Yes. For
Nations,
instance, Satoyama
right?
Initiative, that's one section that I updated. Yes, there'll be other, other new information. I mean, a lot of it was statistics. What percentage of fresh water is used for what? Well, I went and checked all of that, 10 years later, what's the situation? And, basically made sure that that stuff is up to date. So,
That's great. It's a
mhm.
great resource
Mm.
for anybody living in Japan or beyond, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Azby. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Everyone, have a wonderful weekend and see you next week.
Yes, thank you. So